I'm thrilled to be here with my panelists and all of you today. I'm a journalist with Bloomberg, so that's the official warning that there's media in the room. And everyone here is to talk about the US relationship with allies and partners. And I thought I should just, before I introduce my guest, start with a story. I was talking to a retired US general the other day who was saying the thing about US relationship with allies and partners is, let me just tell you something that happened once. So the US general was talking to a British field marshal, and he was saying, very excited about a new capability, a new technology that US wanted to go hard and fast with, and was sharing it with its ally, the UK. And the British, of course, have a great reputation for being terribly, terribly indirect. And so he was quite surprised when the field marshal said, are you going to do the same thing that you always do and move really fast ahead, take up this new capability, and then in years to come say, hold on, where are allies and partners? Where the F have you been? And they both laughed, but I think that some of that is at the heart of what we might be talking about today. My four panelists, we have Dr. Ninh Duong from the Australian Department of Defense. He's at the embassy here in DC, and he's the science leader. He's about to go back to Australia, and he'll be in charge of science and tech for all of Australia's maritime. So he's got some very interesting stories today to tell, and was involved in the development of AUKUS from the beginning. We have Skye Moore, who's the first ever CTO at CENTCOM. She's renowned for sort of driving tech adoption at CENTCOM. She came from Task Force 59 and was on the Hill before that. We've got Colonel Christophe Piubeni. He is with the French Air Force, but he's an exchange officer at the US at the Pentagon. So he's in a very interesting position. He's also been educated in the UK, and he's got lots to say about intelligence sharing. And we've got Colonel Tom Harper, who is UK Strategic Command Attache. He wants me to be very clear that is not in the British tradition nuclear forces, that is joint forces. And he is based at the British Embassy in DC. And he has a lot of different counterparts in the US system, but some of them are SOCOM and Cyber Command. And he's been in the British military for more than 30 years. Thank you very much, all of you. I thought we should start, Colonel Piubeni, with your experience at the Pentagon, because you're right there. And if I understand it correctly, you have a US security clearance, and anything you learn as a French Air Force exchange officer, you may not share with France. And that is both an example of great trust and also perhaps lack of trust. So I thought you could tell us a little bit about that. And I understand in your office in the Pentagon, you have a rug that says, yes, fawn, because you've got fed up of everyone defaulting to no fawn.
Yeah, that's right. Good morning, good afternoon, actually, everyone. So yeah, I've got a US clearance because we have some exchange officer working in the building, which is a proof of trust of the US with some selected allies and partners, which means that technically we are working for the US government. Nevertheless, there is a lot of barrier to share data today. And this is something that really precludes our interoperability, because today the way we see it is really through the technical lens, but to be interoperable, we need also to be able to understand each other and to have organizations that basically are going on the same way. Being 2.5 years in the building, I've seen a lot of things. I think we are moving in the right direction, but we are moving too slowly compared to our competitors. Technology is here to share data, but we are not able to use it correctly because there are many, many organizations and layers which they don't want to take the risk. They don't want to share. Because it's easy to say no than yes, and there have never been any career who has been stopped because a foreign disclosure officer has said no to a foreign guy. So that being said, We can do more. We just have to do that faster. But to go back to your point, the office we are, the yes for, is coming from the Secretary of Defense Mattis. I've got the opportunity to talk to him, to talk to him 2 months ago, and he was in the same position. He was when he was at CENTCOM, he was not able to share everything, every intelligence part coming from your exquisite assets are tagged on a way that we are not able to share, except for the Five Eyes. Doing that, it preclude a lot of operation, and he said, I need to share it. I will take the honors. And he do a mug where it was written yes for, which is a default poster we need. Or your Secretary of Defense is aware of that. He has issued a memo a couple of weeks ago saying that no, the default posture should not be anymore no for. So which is a great point. So we are moving in the right direction. I just think we are moving a little bit too slowly. That makes sense.
I think that's a good opportunity to come to Sky. I think you're known as moving fast within the US system, and it would be great to hear your take on what CENTCOM's been doing about data sharing and your reflections on what Colonel Piubeni says.
Yeah, absolutely. So from our perspective, there are a couple of ways at getting at the data sharing issue. And I'd like to preface it with, by no means have we solved this. We are exploring ways that we think are effective. And so one way of going about that is to his point about the limitations with leveraging exquisite systems and the data that's being pulled off of them and the ways that that can often be limiting. We are finding a lot of opportunity space with open source information and relying on that more heavily from an analytics capability in a way that previously perhaps was not possible due to the amount of data availability, but also culturally wasn't normal. So for the example that I of the organization that I came from, Task Force 5/9, that organization exclusively runs on unclassified information. And the reason for that is that they're using commercially sourced small and medium unmanned surface vessels that collect data that automatically are unclassified. And the opportunity space that that created was incredible to us, because initially the point was we have a suspicion that unmanned surface vessels and AI could really change the game for maritime domain awareness. But increasingly, we discovered it was a game changer for partner sharing, because the LNOs that we could have embedded in our organization at all times, as we do right now from all three of the countries that are represented up here, suddenly opened our eyes to the other possibilities. And not just that, but UK, Australia, and France are very close partners with a long history of ways of finding data sharing. But in the area of central command, we don't need to just share with the countries that are on the stage. We need to share with Bahrain. We need to share with Qatar. We need to share with Saudi Arabia. And so thinking of the different ways that can enable that for us is quite important. And thinking about commercial sector and the exquisite technologies that are coming out of it and the commercial data available is one way of thinking about it. On the flip side of working with the data that may be coming off more exquisite systems or may exist in a higher classification, we're doing initial investments into network architecture that will allow for, say, a network to host secret in the future TS data, but have access control mechanisms on top that allow you to filter depending on the individual. We have talked about this as a community for a while in terms of zero trust architecture. We have actually piloted and modeled out what that would look like from a bounded network perspective. So this is not a hypothetical. We actually have built out an on-prem network where you have access control mechanisms on top. Any partner could go in, you would be tagged based on who are you? Where are you from? What types of projects do you work on? What access is appropriate based on the data layers that are available, and then filtering appropriately based on that. The challenge for that is scale. We're able to do it in limited forms right now, but this is a conversation that extends past technical requirements. This becomes a policy conversation. This becomes a bureaucratic problem, and this increasingly becomes an emotional problem because of previously held conceptions that we have about the ways that we share data and the ways that our networks are configured that may not reflect the reality of how secure data access might function.
Thank you. Colonel Harper, can you give us a sense of your experience of this problem, and perhaps let's hear a little bit about your assessment of lessons learned from Ukraine. Obviously, you've got allies doing a number of different things together there in support of the Ukrainians.
Indeed. Thanks very much. I think the first point, just riffing off of Sky, is about data. And there's a huge amount of technological progress, which is really, really encouraging. My big concern is exactly as you alluded to, is the policy side of things. Despite all of that progress technically, we still haven't agreed on shared data standards. Data ownership is a big issue, and the digital infrastructure. So there's a huge amount of stuff that's not particularly exciting that needs to happen in the background in order for us to really harness all of the goodness that's being found there. And unfortunately, that stuff takes a long time. And I think I'm pretty confident that speed will be one of the themes from today. It certainly is for Ukraine. And I think the open source intelligence side of things has been absolutely fascinating to watch. Certainly from a UK perspective, very, very early on, the rapid declassification of information. Hopefully many of you will see the daily tweets from the Ministry of Defence offering summaries of what's going on in our assessment. It's also been really useful to offer, if you will, a pre-buttal to potential false flag operations. And I think that these types of activities will be really good and valuable going forward. It also allows us to anticipate, because we're able to use a cross-referencing of a huge amount of open source data, reinforced and cross-checked with our secret sources and things, and that helps us to get a good idea of what an adversary might be doing. Beyond open source, I think certainly in the context of alliances, it's been a really timely reminder about the importance of standards. So if we think of the sort of Frankenstein army that the Ukrainians have gratefully received from all of our nations, we really haven't helped them with really complicated supply chains. NATO standard 155mm ammunition is not standard. There's different charges, different fuses. And if we're going to go into a large scale conflict together, I think that's something that we really do need to readdress. And the beauty is, this is in our recent DNA with things like NATO STANAGs. Again, not particularly exciting, but in this context, really, really important. The final one that I would say is the role of technology and industry. So we saw very quickly Starlink coming in to support the Ukrainians. We've seen the proliferation of software applications, which has effectively made every citizen a sensor. That comes with risks, but it also comes with huge opportunities. And it's been fascinating to see how quickly a lot of that has been adopted. And I think that is a kite mark for the future. So I think those would be the main things that I draw at this stage.
Thank you very much. When you mentioned speed, just to come back to you, what do you think is going to make anything speed up? It sounds, I think we spoke beforehand and you said you suspect everyone's going to violently agree on this panel. Given so much agreement, why isn't it happening, and what actually needs to change?
I think it's really just, particularly in the policy space, it's just really, really difficult. This is outside of defense. This is now international policy arenas. That type of thing takes time. There's sensitivities and cultures associated with this. I mean, clearly we need to get our skates on, but I think the one thing I would say is I'm really encouraged that this is now being talked about at senior levels in a much more informed way than it has been even in the last 6 months. People are aware of the problem, so that, as Christophe says, progress is being made. We just need to keep the pressure on.
That feels like a good moment to come to you, Dr. Duong. So I know that you've been involved in AUKUS since the start. This is a strategic partnership that Australia first sort of pushed forward to the UK and then to the US, and created, obviously international headlines and some upset with France. But as you push towards actually delivering AUKUS, can you tell us what that looks like? Is it easy, plain sailing for you now that you've essentially created this new structure?
Thanks for the question, Katrina. So AUKUS, extremely important announcement by the presidents and prime ministers. It's fair to say it's a bit of a pathfinder about how we work at a much deeper level. How do we develop capabilities fast so that we actually create a bit of a deterrence effect? And to be honest, even announcements of AUKUS is quite a consequential deterrence message for us. Where the three nations have really been focusing on over the last year since the announcement has been really about setting up the governance framework, as well as working through the hundreds of little barriers that get in the way as we try and work out how do the three nations work at a much deeper level. And you know, we could spend hours just talking about all the different barriers, but certainly some of the other panelists has already talked about information sharing. But technology exchange is really important when you look at co-developing capabilities. Export controls get in the way, and Tom already mentioned, you know, there's a whole raft of cultural barriers when you actually work through the mechanics of what it takes to set up agreements between the three countries. How do you set up the security frameworks that allows the sharing of some pretty sensitive information, as well as you know, sharing technology in a way where we protect those technologies. And yeah, so there's so many barriers we're trying to get through. You know, it's really interesting. I think that as a Pathfinder, we really hope that we can overcome these issues as a way to drive forward to get these capabilities we're after under AUKUS.
Can you describe a little bit more some of the challenges you're experiencing? And I mean, we should explain, AUKUS almost comes in two parts. There's the nuclear submarine part, which I don't think you're talking about right now. And there's the second part, which is really going ahead on technological innovation, AI. Perhaps you'd like to expand a little bit on that. And how do you know where you want to be? And how do you know you're not there right now? How far behind are you? I mean, obviously, this is an agreement from 2021 now.
Yeah, great question. Certainly, the nuclear power submarines, the benefit of that thrust has really been there is clear focus around what we're trying to achieve. So very clear about what the three countries want. You know, working through the optimal pathway to get to that point has been relatively smooth. Because all three countries sort of understand where their equities are and where they're going to benefit. The difficulty we've had with Pillar 2, with advanced capabilities, is really because it's a little bit more nebulous in terms of the objectives we're trying to achieve. We talk about, what is it, six technology areas. When you talk about cyber, what is that cyber capability we're after? You know, AI and autonomy, the scope of that is ridiculously large. You know, when you talk about quantum technologies, that's quite a long-term objective we're aiming for. So that has really been where the AUKUS framework has sort of struggled to work through. I have to say that the undersea capabilities is going pretty strongly in terms of developing a plan forward. And I'm pretty sure the government will start making announcements around those projects where we've got a clear idea of the direction we're heading and the pathways. And then on top of that, there are issues around with whether or not we're working under the existing framework for international cooperation. So there's a very well-established framework for international cooperation in terms of setting up memorandums of understanding, project arrangements, etc. But there is a long bureaucratic process associated with it. You know, generally to do a project arrangement, it could take anywhere between 12 months and 2 years, which is just too long. So under AUKUS, we're really trying to push to do things faster. And as a result, we really need to look at new processes, new ways, what reforms we need to do. Some of these are legislative reforms that need to be made. Others are policy issues. Others are regulation issues, and then I can't understate the importance of the cultural issues. So the people that are actually signing off on those agreements, you know, at the moment they're used to many years of working in a particular way. In which case they sort of adopt a risk-averse approach to this, and we really need people to sort of listen to what our seniors are saying, what the President, Prime Minister are saying, and taking a more risk-tolerant approach.
Because you couldn't really have a stronger signal than the fact that the three leaders have got together several times to say we want to do this. So the fact that you're having difficulties getting things through, is this? Are you surprised by it? Do you kick yourself that you hadn't factored in space for bureaucracy? And are you seeing any interest in the US system in one option, I suppose, speeding up the bureaucracy, or the second, actually passing some sort of legislative change? And are you clear on what that ask is?
Great question. So I don't think we're surprised by these barriers we're coming across. The promise of AUKUS was really as a battering ram to help push those through. Where the struggle is really about getting everyone aligned so they are all contributing to overcoming these barriers. So certainly the messaging from the US leaders and the Australian and the UK leaders are definitely there. It's taking a bit of time for that to filter down to the working level. We talk a little bit about the permafrost layer, which is sort of that layer of middle management who are responsible for implementing and delivering the outcomes. But to be totally fair, they are struggling with how to achieve those objectives, given the constraints they're currently under. And also to be perfectly fair, we have seen a lot of movement in the last year. So a great example that Christophe mentioned to do with no form. There has been some pretty strong momentum shifts around not overclassifying things. Under AUKUS, we're developing a list of products that we would like cleared, and the US is actually putting the resources in getting the foreign disclosure officers to actually clear those documents to us. So we're seeing great movement there. I think where the challenge lies now is technology exchange, which actually requires export control reform that's opinion on some people. Others believe that you can do it within the existing regime. So that's actually the ongoing debate at the moment, is whether or not you can just expedite processes under the existing regime, or we actually need a reform of the system.
Is it right that Canada has an exemption under this? Is this the FMS element? So
my understanding, and please, I caveat that I'm a scientist, I'm not a policy person, but my understanding is Canada actually has an exemption under legal legislative law by Congress, and there are some schools of thought that under AUKUS, Australia and the US should seek a similar exemption.
Christophe, listening to this, do you think, oh, phew, I'm glad I'm not part of AUKUS?
I think in every setback there are opportunities. So that being said, what is interesting with the alliance that UK, Australia, and US has put in place, it's not only the will to share technology, but it's also the means they put in place to do that, the way to funnel some money to the US. And those are the interesting thing about the alliance and partners. I think there are many alliances. So each of them, they have pros and cons. You all know that our country is in a really specific position about that. But what I like in this alliance is they make the commitment to share. There are many Australian people and many British officers also going to Indo-PACOM, and no, there is no. They are in front of the wall. So basically, they have to deliver something. The US has to deliver something, because the country just on the other side of the Pacific, there is no issue. They don't have any allies, which is something which is it can be a weakness for them, but they just have to share within their country. The US, they have to share with every allies and partners, and not the first day of war before. So I think that many nations could take advantage of the outcomes of AUKUS to see, because it can be a proof of concept. We see AUKUS through, many people see AUKUS through the submarines. For me, I really see an opportunity to how can we go around every legislative issue that we have. And this is the interesting thing. I won't comment anything which is political. We are all militaries. We've been on ground together. We know what comrade in arms is. We've got British and Aussie storms in my country. So I won't comment on that. What is interesting is there will be an outcome. And I think many nations, allies and partners of the US, they need to take this outcome to make that better and faster. So in my sense, I think I'm really looking forward of what they are able to achieve, because at one moment there will be more nations willing to aggregate with different level of clearance, or, as you said, different level of access. And this will be really I think, in my point of view, the thing we need to achieve, rather than saying, hey, why are you not in this alliance, and why do you want to be part of that or not? I just think that they are allies and partners, and no matter what the framework of the alliance is, the idea is that we are together on the first day and we are able to fight together.
I might just quickly jump in. So I actually think that's a fantastic perspective, Christophe. And just to comment, under AUKUS, there is an intention to open it up to other allies further down the track. It's really just about trying to cement what AUKUS means for the three countries as a pathfinder. Essentially making sure we've got our house sorted. And then at that point, there is a clear intention from our leaders to include other countries and allies.
I think the names that have been mentioned are Canada and Japan initially. Can you comment on that? And Christophe, do you want to add France in?
So once again, I'm only an 06, so it's far above my pay grade. But I can make a kind of super PAC if you want to be the next president in France. But I think that if there are too many partners or too many allies, it can be cumbersome at one moment because sometimes there are some funny drawing about NATO, about Europe, where there are 27 countries trying to have a different type of coffee. So when we bring allies together, we need to find a common ground. So for instance, we've got the trilateral between the US, France, and UK. But there is a common ground on that. We are P3, we are like-minded nation, and our government is in a way that we can directly use power to do something. So the more people you have after in some alliance, there are alliances where it's not interesting to be there per se. You have to be pluggable on this alliance if you need, and NATO for that is a great way of doing that. So. I don't know if there is a will. For sure, Pacific is a nation, a place of interest for us because we have 2 million of nationals in that area, and it's quite far from France. It's 12 hours of flight with a couple of air-to-air refueling, so it's not a place where we can go quickly. But I don't know. We are in many alliances together. We've been in Australia a couple of times. So for me, it's not having an alliance, it's having a network where we can work together, because at the end of the day, it's just a framework, but having and the US is trying to do this kind of network where every single country, if they've got an interest to be plugged on us, they can have it.
Ninh, we should just hear from you on Canada and Japan and France.
And I should just clarify, the current thinking at the moment is including other countries in specific projects rather than wholesale inclusion under AUKUS. So there has been jokes around, having France included as AUKUS or Japan as JAUKUS or the South Korea as RAUKUS or KNAUKUS. But so you can come up with all these different acronyms, but the current intent is really to or the current thinking is about including allies into specific projects.
Can I add?
Absolutely.
I'd like to foot stomp what he said about the importance of specificity, either of the people included or the project of focus, and that being a defining factor for your ability to move quickly on something and build measurable substantive action, where we found that you can choose either specificity of partners or specificity of project, but you must choose one in order to be precise about what your goals are and move forward in a realistic way. So if we were working on a bilateral with somebody and you can say, I have a very specific goal with this bilateral because we have particular topics or items of interest, our ability to execute and show demonstrable change is better. Similarly, if you have a larger number of countries, but a very specific goal, we can at least organize around a more narrow goal. So what I have in mind is for our maritime forces in CENTCOM, we've put forward the goal for 100 USV fleet. It'll be 80% partners, 20% US. And the specificity of that allows us to bring in a much broader set of partners. Whereas if we just said we are going to loosely focus on unmanned and we will not give some sort of specific benchmark that forces us all to move towards that common point, I think we would have been able to see the progress and speed that we have seen otherwise.
Do you see AUKUS then as a stepping stone? I mean, when you listen to that debate, I don't know how closely you experience that, but what's your take from listening to Ninh explain how many problems there are and even realizing something that everyone has agreed to do?
Yeah, I think both of their points about proof of concept and showing the mechanisms that are available is really important. So it's in part of explaining that there is a way of going about this in a way of jointly pursuing capability that revolves around, okay, we're going to name these technologies, we're going to name the specific countries that are involved, and we're going to put ourselves on a timeline and a deadline and a clock. And that forces folks to move with greater speed and purpose than they might have otherwise. What we feel from a combatant command is that we have liaisons from all three of these countries embedded with us both forward and at our own headquarters back here stateside. And we're able to focus on those technologies in our own small ways. So again, the efforts that we have with unmanned systems, the efforts that we have with AI and integrating those into our operations gives us a small bounded set where we can say, hey, we discovered that sharing not just the data, but the analytics tools is really important for us in this context. And we were able to do it in this way. These are the lessons learned that we can pass over to OSD and say, perhaps these are applicable to other teams, and then we can spread fires that way. And so it requires both a top-down and a bottom-up approach in order to move it forward. But we are able to take really specific bounded scenarios and express what our experience with those are.
Tom, can I come to you? Is any of this sounding familiar? And what's your take on the speed at which AUKUS can progress?
So I think I'm completely bought into the idea of a small select group taking something forward for the benefit of others, and hopefully we'll realize that. I really like Christophe's point about networks, and it's been really interesting as, we've studied the Indo-Pacific and the challenge that China presents. I think there's a risk that people very quickly take a regional focus. Back to lessons from Ukraine, it was really interesting how quickly that became a global phenomenon in terms of food insecurity, energy crisis. And so as we look to the value of partners and allies and the source of strategic advantage, the Indo-Pacific clearly is the sort of area of interest, if you will, or the area of responsibility, absolutely key. But there is a broader area of interest that I think is worth bearing in mind. So the quicker that we can get this kind of stuff out there, the better.
You mentioned China, and obviously everyone here is used to now hearing the date 2027 when it comes to Taiwan. Can we just go down the panel and hear what you're most focused on in terms of 2027, and if that's the number you're thinking about, and the kind of practicalities you think it raises for each of your specialisms? Tom.
Our policy is that Russia is our acute threat. Charity begins at home, and that's what's happening in our backyard at the moment. But we do recognize China as a sort of longer term threat. I think the wording in our recent integrated review refresh was an epoch-defining challenge. So it's absolutely recognized. But I think in terms of timelines, right now, the national focus is very much on Russia and Ukraine because it has to be for us. But we're working closely with the US and clearly with the Australians to keep up to speed with what's going on and making sure that we're able to contribute to AUKUS.
Thank you. Christophe?
Yeah, just to give you a flavor. So the distance between where my parents are living and Bakhmut is smaller than the width of Texas. So we are feeling the war of Ukraine in Europe directly. So many people are not aware of that here in the US because you've got two oceans, which give you a little bit of space, even though some nations are posing a global threat. So we are really focused on what is going on at less than 2 hours of flight from our borders. Or we can do that, but we are not naive. We see that other nations want to take opportunities in Europe. So we are looking what is going on in Pacific. We've been deployed many times to Hawaii, and we are going back to the Pacific area. We've been in Australia a couple of times. We try to show that there are freedom of navigation everywhere. But we have to be noxious that our country is smaller than Texas. So we are a really, really small country. So we try to put forward what we think is right, but we will do that with our allies and partners. So basically, I think our main threat is what is going on east of Europe, but we know that we have some commitments because we are nuclear power. So having a seat at the UN comes with some responsibility. So of course we are looking what is going on in China, but I think it's not only our country will be able to do something. But going back to this panel, which is allies and partner, and what will going on in 2027, I think we need to look what we need to do tomorrow. And if we really want to be more integrated to defeat any threat, not only the one posed by a country, it can be posed by a disease or something else. We need to understand each other. And the thing that the US Air Force is trying to put forward is called integrated by design. So still the beginning, when there is a problem, before building a kit and trying to sell it to anyone, we put the people together, we put the caveats together, we say, hey, this is our red lines, and we do that. And if we are able to do that all together, the allies we have, which is 1/3 of the human population here, I think we'll be able to defeat any threat. And it will be more interesting if we keep looking what will occur in 2027 and we say, oh, it's okay, by 2027, will we have the latest version of this aircraft? But if they are attacking tomorrow, we won't be ready. And if we want to be ready anytime, defeat any threat, we need to be more integrated till the beginning, which means that we need to understand each other. Because for me, interoperability go also through the lens of having people being able to speak together, having organization which understand each other.
Sky, obviously you're focused on CENTCOM, but tell us how 2027 looks to you, and any exchanges you have with Indo-PACOM as well.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of what we've talked about today for data sharing is region and country agnostic. That's the reality. Whether you are in the Pacific, whether you are in Europe, whether you are in the Middle East, you can and must share data with partners, some of which you have worked with for decades and some of which you have worked for less time. And so what we're learning is that data sharing is necessary but not sufficient increasingly. There is a layer of analytics on top of that and the tools associated and access to those tools that are equally, if not more important. Because if we just do a data dump, absolutely the first step that we're going to hit is data sharing, and we are working through those friction points now. But if you look forward to 2027 or beyond, there is an additional layer of tool access and software tool access specifically that is going to be critical. Because if you just dump an endless amount of data, too much data can be the same as no data if you don't have the analytical tools to pull meaningful insight out of it. And for that reason, we are increasingly discovering that shared software development and shared software tools are actually the backbone of capability. And to the extent that we can continue driving that both in our region, but then also sharing those lessons to others, that is actually what's going to allow us to function at a higher level.
Ninh?
Yeah, so Australia's attention squarely focused on the Indo-Pacific, and mainly two things: building deterrence to dissuade any nation from unilaterally, creating starting a war or getting involved in coercion activities, and then secondly, really about making sure that guardrails in place to avoid any sort of escalation or miscalculation that can lead to a conflict by mistake. Our Australian government just released a public version on the Defence Strategic Review, which is probably the most consequential defence strategy policy document we've ever produced. It lays out pretty clearly where we see our strategic environment, and it talks about how our defence force needs to be more focused, needs to really focus around deterrence as well as asymmetric capabilities. And it goes to the point of listing 10 critical capabilities that we need to develop very quickly as well in order to achieve our strategic objectives in the region. Have a look at the Defence Strategic Review. It's during my career, I've never come across a strategy document that's been so blunt and plain about what the situation is, how do we need to respond, and what that response needs to be. So certainly from Australia's perspective, our defence forces are working hard in order to get to that endpoint as fast as possible.
In our last few minutes, I just want to come to AI and autonomy. And I'm going to start by quoting a paper that Christophe wrote in 2022. You said the ability to connect our sensors for the next fight needs to happen today so that our next generation fighters and systems can operate smoothly in a new digital architecture. And you also said that if a potential threat from a Russian bomber appears on an early warning radar scopes, it could take more than 12 minutes for personnel from various desks at North American Aerospace Defense Command to coordinate information, build a slide presentation with only the most pertinent data, and present it to the officer in charge to determine if a threat truly exists. Christophe, can you touch a little bit on the room you see for AI and what needs to happen? And then I'm going to ask Sky to wrap up for us on that.
Yeah, so just for the sake of clarity, this article has been cleared by SAF-PA and OSD policy. So everything which is written is true by the time it was written. But yeah, that was the way in NORAD that things were going because they were using PowerPoint and they were not using the power of data. A lot of people in the Pentagon are thinking that data is something just falling from the sky. And I know there are progress which has been made. There are many companies who are trying to work on that, but basically is not creating data, not creating PowerPoint, but just using data to help our leaders with the environment, which is moving every time, just to have the right decision. And AI will do a lot, but AI is a kind of buzzword because you need data to make that work.
And Sky, I'm sure you know there are hearings on the Hill today and tomorrow all about AI. I'm sure a lot of it's going to touch on AI and warfare. You're there at the edge looking at it. Tell us what the future is.
The near future, I'll be honest, I think is much less sexy than we all imagine. It's really focused on getting my data into one place, cleaning it, building the digital workflows that the data will then sit on, and then we can get to the fun business of machine learning and everything else that comes after. So in the near term, the future looks like I can visualize all of my data in one place in a table. And that's magical because previously I had to go to 12 places. And then in the midterm future, that will look like my data has been visualized so that I can watch a track in my airspace or my maritime space that is contextualized by a richness of layers that previously could not be viewed in the same space. And then that long-term perspective becomes this AI and machine learning flavor of I understand the patterns of life across my entire region and I can identify when something falls out of it. And that becomes highlighted for an operator who can then take action on it at a speed and with a level of precision that previously was not possible. That said, with that end state in mind, there is all of this work that has to come before of this hard work and investment in the what may feel like drudgery of data preparation and digital workflows and statistical modeling, but all of that is going to be critical if we are ever going to realize any sort of meaningful capability from AI.
And can you just touch on the role of allies and partners in that? I must say the story I began at the beginning, the subject was AI, and the fear was that the US was going to storm ahead and then turn around and say, allies and partners, where are you? And everyone would say, but you went ahead without us.
I think at a combatant command, we are well equipped to work a different model than what you described, because the reality is that for us, anything that we do in theater, we cannot, have not, and will not do alone. We have partners embedded in our teams. We conduct our operations jointly with the forces, with the countries that are seated on this stage. And so for that reason, we are finding that we have to change the way that we think about data sharing. And to the earlier point, we have to change the way that we think about software development of these increasingly critical mission applications that we rely on. These digital workflows cannot just be accessed by the US. They have to be accessible by partners. And so it creates an opportunity for us to beat the drum on the demand signal from a combatant command back to the department and say, this is the flavor of capability that we have to have. These are the changes in policy that need to take place. This is a path forward that may work, whether it's with AUKUS, whether it's with other bilaterals that we're doing. That is not to say it is going to go smoothly every single time. That is not to say that we may not falter as we go along, but I think that we are positioned to try to leverage the technologies that are in our hands. It's just about getting the policy right and getting the our bureaucratic processes to allow us to leverage those technologies better.
Thank you. Well, on that note, thank you very much to all of our panelists today and to you, the audience, and catch them when you can in the crowd.